Welcome to Rock the Crown. Introducing our host, Nafisa, queen about her business, 360. Host Naima, queen get it done, and fitness guru. Host Nefertari, queen residential redeveloper and creative director. Host Daia, boss queen biz and youth motivator. All right, Crown Nation, let's get it. Season 2, Rock the Crown.
Hi, Crown Nation. Welcome to another episode of Rock the Crown. This is your host, Daia, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Naima.
Nefertari.
Nafisa.
And today's episode, we are going to talk about mental health. First, we wanted to start off by talking about some of the issues that are going on in our lives today. You know, it's 2020. We have this COVID illness that has taken the lives of many. Our sympathy goes out to those who have lost their loved ones. We also have a lot of people who are losing their jobs, and this creates an atmosphere of fear and loss and grief. And so this can kind of push us into a state of depression. It can cause us to, not feel so well. It can cause us to be in just a terrible mood, not be motivated to get out and do what we need to do. But these illnesses, these states, these moods, we'll call them, are sometimes, can be adjusted by, taking a walk outside, can be adjusted by, being around people you love, being with friends and family, being reminded that there are better days ahead. Today, our show, we wanted to focus on those of us who suffer from a mental illness termed depression and anxiety, to where sometimes it's not an exact cause that may lead to these feelings. There may not be something you can directly pinpoint, that is causing you to feel this way. It's just a feeling that you have, and it's something a lot of times you cannot crawl out from. So this show today, we're going to focus on those two or those disorders that people have. So I have with us, we have among us actually, Naima Abdullah Wells, who actually took some time to get certification through mental health first aid. Naima, tell us about the program that you went through with the community members.
So actually, thank you so much, Daia. And I also want to say, before we continue to go on, we are not certified doctors in this field. I have a certification that I've gotten through the Mental Health Agency of America here in Georgia, but it was sponsored actually by EMAN. So EMAN here in Atlanta had a program where they were signing people up. If you wanted to come and get your mental health first aid certification, you could do that. So we spent a good amount of time going through a booklet to identify the signs, understand what are the next steps, and how we as individual agents can help the community with mental health first aid. Okay, so not sure if anyone has heard about it. We did have a couple of people in our community who are also there who are mental health first aid certified, and so I'm not a clinical doctor, but I am certified in that area. And so this was important because I myself grew up around mental illness and, just experiencing it in various aspects throughout my life, and felt like this is something that I needed to know in order to help those around me.
So we thank you for that, Naima. So we're going to take time in this episode to just ask Naima some questions about some of the things that she learned going through the program. One of the first questions that I have is, Naima, can you start by telling us what is depression? What is the depression disorder?
Depression. So we have two separate things that we have going on here: depression, the word, and then the disorder itself. So, depression is actually attached to emotions and feelings. And generally, when we start thinking about depression, it's the sad feelings that we have, um, the blues, as they would say, right? And the feelings of guilt or remorse or unhappiness, that can be depression. And sometimes we can experience those things in a short period of time, meaning an act or something could have happened to make you feel depressed. But then there are people who actually feel this feeling for more than 2 weeks. So if you begin to feel sadness, anxiety, guilt, anger, frustration, just destitute, and that lasts for over 2 weeks, then you are dealing with a depressive disorder. We know that we all go through depression, but a depressive disorder is a little bit different. And we want to make sure that people know the difference between the two. And that also helps us in being able to identify some of the symptoms of depression.
So, what are some of the symptoms of a depression disorder?
So some of the symptoms people can, so if you know people who have been, really, really excited about life, and then all of a sudden they're kind of in a really, really monotone type mood. And we see that now going through the situation where we're physically distanced from people, and some of us are socially distanced from people. So you'll see people's mood, it's kind of gone down a little bit. People who may not be eating as often. They have a lack of energy. You see people who are sleeping more often, and just have no desire or excitement to be interested in anything. Those are signs of and symptoms of depression. People who have a difficult time concentrating. So, you may have been the person that was always on it. Now you're like, what? I don't, you're like, you can't remember things, and your concentration level has reduced. That could be also a sign of depression.
Mhm.
People who start moving slow, um, you just become more agitated,
Right.
right? When people say things to you, what are you talking about? That can begin. Those are signs of depression, especially people who are not easily agitated.
Mhm.
If you're easily agitated in general, we have to kind of, look at that. People who are having signs of difficulty sleeping. A lot of people, I don't know if you all are on social media at night. People are up 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning on social media. Why aren't you all sleeping? Right. So we need to think about those are also symptoms of depression. And then just a lack of, like, guess what? I love hamburgers, pizza, but I just don't want to eat anything right now. I don't want to eat anything. And that loss of appetite are a couple of symptoms of depression.
Thank you, Naima, for that. As I listen to you when you talk about depression, so it sounds like, everybody can go through a different phase of depression, but it's short term. But as far as long-term depression, I think it's clear that we can define that as an actual disease when we think about mental illness. And so one of the things I was thinking about is when you have depression and anxiety, I know oftentimes we may kind of get that mixed up or confused. And I've found that even for myself personally, I've used that word anxiety a lot here recently. And I never used to do that. And I don't know, for whatever reason in the past month, I go, oh, my anxiety, or, either I hear other people talking about that. So I wanted you to maybe talk a little bit about the different types of anxiety, or what is an anxiety disorder?
Okay, so anxiety. So we want to go back to depression being something that's of the mind, it's emotional, right? And anxiety is actually something that kind of displays itself physiologically and in people's behavior. So when people begin to have anxiety, your body is responding to that specific thing. So you'll see people who begin to sweat, people who begin to shake, your heart, you're like, oh my gosh, I feel like my heart is beating out of my chest. That is anxiety, right? And so being able to know the difference between the two: one is more of your mind and it deals with your emotion, one is more physical and your behavior, like what is happening with you. That is anxiety. And it turns into disorder when, again, it lasts for an extended period of time as opposed to a couple of days. Or, when an incident happens, what happens, we should also think about the body will always register any emotions that you're having. And it doesn't necessarily tie it to specific events, it ties it to emotions. And so if you have had an anxiety attack before, right? The body then begins to defend itself by saying, man, I don't want to feel this way. I have to
Mhm.
protect myself. So your adrenals will begin to kick in and the fight or flight response happens, right? So
Mhm.
whenever you have that emotion that triggers in your body, automatically your body starts to go into this fight or flight mode. It does not even mean that you're going through the exact same experience because the body doesn't know about the experience. It only knows about the emotions. This is why it's important for us to make sure that not only can we identify when we're feeling depressed or having anxiety, but then beginning to register. Oh my gosh, okay, I can feel my heart starting to palpitate. I can feel myself sweating. You know what? I'm feeling like I'm getting hot. What is that that's creating that, and beginning to control those responses through the body.
Yes, that's very well. Another thing I wanted to mention too is when people have anxiety, they also use a tactic called avoidance. So if there is a particular thing that they feel anxious about, some people is their anxiety is around being in social settings. So they'll avoid those settings.
Right.
Some people, their anxiety is driving on the highway. So some people just have a fear of being on the highway, but some people it's an anxiety disorder that's around driving on the highway. And
Right.
so they avoid doing that thing. So, it's very important that we, kind of look at some of those things that, people, when they say, sometimes we have to kind of let up. When somebody says, no, I really, really, really just can't do that. Sometimes we push them and push them and push them, not realizing that this is something that they really, really are dealing with. So Naima, I wanted to also ask the question,
So no spider.
huh?
No spider.
Right. So spy. And I think there's a difference in fear and anxiety, right? So like I have a fear of heights, but it's something
Right.
that I get an adrenaline rush when I actually conquer it. So it's a
Right.
fear. When I face it, I kind of feel that fear and then I get through and I feel good. But with some people, it just is a heightened sense of fear. I mean, it really like Naima mentioned, you experience those physiological symptoms, the sweating, the shaking, and then just eventually just shutting down. So as far as depression and anxiety, Naima, if some of our loved ones are dealing with this, I know you mentioned the symptoms, but how do we actually identify it? And then what can we do to help or support that person, who is going through experiencing those things?
Okay. So let's kind of also go through some symptoms of anxiety. So you may not be able to see all of them, but you may want to be able to talk through when someone is having anxiety. Number one, you can kind of see it on their face, right? So as you were saying, Dia, when someone says, you know what, let's go on the freeway. Oh, girl, you can go on the freeway. It's not that big of a deal. But she may have anxiety, or he may have anxieties driving next to 18-wheelers, or just driving by people who are fast. And then you're forcing them. What you should see is, what is their body saying? Can you see, like, generally when people's heart starts pounding, what's the first thing that people do?
Grab it. Mm-hmm.
They touch their heart, right? So do you see those symptoms? Like, okay, when people can't breathe, what do? They also touch their heart, right? They're not like breathing going like this. They're like, oh my God, I can't breathe. So these are some symptoms that you should see when you see people. If they're having a hard time breathing, you can always tell when someone's having a hard time breathing because you'll see this, but right? They can't get a full breath. And you can tell there's a difference between me being able to get a full breath and me struggling to get a breath, right? Do you see those symptoms in somebody? That's anxiety for some people. Do you see people having dizzy spells? Like, do they start, kind of like doing this and they feel like they're about to pass out? Do you see people touching their head? Do they have headaches? Do you see people begin to sweat? Some people sweat on their nose. So seeing people sweat on their nose, like right above their lip, right above below their lip, and on their brow line. Do you see sweat developing in those areas? That also is an indicator of anxiety for people. Some people also go to all the way to the point where they have nausea and they actually vomit. These are signs of anxiety. And so how can we help these people when they begin to do this? Number one, and some people also, when you think about the muscular, right? Some people will begin to have cramps, right? Because as we talked about in some other segments previously, the body responds to everything. Do they have enough water in their system for their muscles to be able to kind of carry out? And as you were saying, Dai, the adrenals start to kick in to protect the body. And if the adrenals are constantly on fight or flight, what happens to the adrenals? They start reducing. And so, um, once previously, it was told before that when people lose or begin, like when they surpass the adrenal state, right, they go into a coma to protect themselves. So everybody's like, oh my gosh, this person's in a coma. They're actually going in to preserve the body so that it doesn't have to continue to overextend itself. And that's how you see how people can come out of a coma. And some people cannot, depending upon the level of anxiety and or trauma that has been experienced. So some of the things that we want to talk about when we have anxiety and depression, what can we do with these individuals? Number one, ask them what is happening. How do you feel? Do you feel safe with yourself? And the reason we want to begin to ask the people this is sometimes you don't know how far people are until you begin to ask questions. And some people are uncomfortable asking questions, but number one, you always have to ask people, do you have a fear of harming yourself or others? Right? This is a fear that people are afraid to ask people that they love, but this is important. Do you have a fear of harming yourself and others? Some people can immediately say yes, and some people can immediately say no, right? But if they have a fear of harming themselves or others, that is a sign that they're past depression and or past anxiety, right? Then you need to go into, okay, well, let's talk about it, right? And this is where people kind of get it wrong. Because the first thing of talking about it is not talking, it's listening, right? And you have to begin to listen with a non-judgmental ear. This is what people who are going through these things need. Listening with a non-judgmental ear. What does that really mean? It means like when people begin to approach a subject that you're uncomfortable with, you're not trying to sway them or tell them anything. You're just listening, right? And you're just acknowledging, I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Not, I'm trying, well, you know that ain't right. You know, we often go into a listen mode with a judgmental ear because we think we can fix people. Sometimes people just want to be heard. They don't want to hear all these lessons and talks and everything. So listening with a non-judgmental ear, very, very important. There's some great techniques that I recommend everyone go online to understand how to do that. And this is all, that's just important period as a parent also. And then after that, you have to give assurance, give reassurance. Okay, I hear you. I acknowledge that I'm hearing you. You don't have to agree with what they're saying. Just yes, 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 that. Giving the reassurance. It's just like when you get a text message from somebody and they don't respond back. What happens? You kind of get a little upset, right? Or if someone says, hey, how you doing today? And you don't acknowledge them, so people need reassurance. So that's what you do. Okay, yes, I hear you, I acknowledge that. And then asking them, are you ready or do you need some professional help? Right? And oftentimes some people will say, I don't really need any help, but being willing and ready to give them the necessary help. And there are several things that are online where you can actually get people help. And one good thing that's happening right now with COVID is that because we're all in our homes, if you needed to get a counselor, it's not waiting 2 or 3 days. You can actually get a counselor the same day. So if someone says that I need some help, I know that there's someone in my family who um, he's older, but he's struggling, right? And he just wants someone to talk to. The fact that he's even acknowledging that is extremely important. So getting them the proper help that they need. Number one, if you don't have health insurance, there are still plenty of free counseling online. Don't ever think that there is not any resources for you because you don't have money. But if you have resources with your insurance, you should definitely go through your counseling, your primary care physician to seek a counselor. And if not, definitely just going online to find what resources are available for counseling. Because sometimes people just need to talk it out. And sometimes they don't want to talk it out with people that they know because of the judgment. They just want to talk it out to someone who is going to listen. And oftentimes, a counselor is not giving advice. Counselors don't give advice. Counselors listen non-judgmentally, right? That's why people love to go to counselors. They know they can go talk trash, do whatever, say whatever, and a counselor will never give you advice. And those counselors that are giving you advice, you need to be, that is a sign to take precaution, because that is not their role and responsibility. Their role and responsibility is to get you to talk about your feelings and to work toward a result, but not for them to actually give you advice. Okay. So those are some things, thinking about taking people outside of their environment. And this is very, very hard to do with people who are depressed. People who are depressed, they don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to do anything. People who have anxiety, they don't want to necessarily, as you were saying, Dia, people who are socially, have social phobia, which is an anxiety. They don't want to go out in the public. But now, because everybody is kind of inside, you still have opportunities where people can go to the garden. So you there are farms here in Atlanta that you can go to and work and still have social distancing and still have spacing. And people don't understand the nutrition that comes from the ground, the nitrogen that comes from the ground is so very important for our mental state. So I like to tell people all the time, and he's like, how we as African Americans survived slavery? Tilling the fields. That's how, because of the ground itself. It has so many nutrients, and we weren't 100% had mental stability, but that also helped in terms of our mental stability to be able to push on because of what we were doing with the ground. So I'm encouraging people to write, color, paint, go driving, garden, doing things that are a little bit different, games, anything that can kind of take their mind off of what they're experiencing right now is important. Making sure also that they're eating well. No junk foods. When you're in a depressive and anxiety type state, you're relying on your health. And so it's important to make sure that you're eating foods that will kind of resonate. Like beets help with your circular system. So thinking about, if you're eating beets, that's going to help your heart. So if you're having anxiety, those palpitations, those type of foods are also going to begin to help you through those processes. So just making sure that you're properly eating. And Nafisa, I don't know if you had any foods that you wanted to share with us today regarding um, processing through depression and anxiety. Do you have any foods you wanted to share?
Hi, yeah. So I just wanted to make a quick point about the role that diet also plays in our moods and depression moods. I mean, it's a lot of scientific studies out there, in particular, that say that traditional American diet, we have a higher rate of depression than, let's say, a Mediterranean diet. Even studies that say that we have anywhere from 25 to 35% more depression as related to a traditional diet than, let's say, a Mediterranean or a Japanese diet. So when you talk about not eating a lot of processed foods and focusing more on vegetables and your omegas like salmon and fruits and vegetables, and staying away from processed foods, a lot of sugar, staying away from dairy in particular, and lean meat, all that affects our optimal function of our brain, and which in turn affects our mood as well. So that's just like a short tidbit. And you all can research on Crown Nation, you can research that too, on foods that affect your mood and foods that will give you the best mood. And those are just a few items there.
Okay, great.
So I actually had a question for you too, Naima.
Uh-huh.
Naima,
Mhm.
Can I ask you a question too?
Sure.
Two things. One thing that came to my mind was about the thyroid.
Mhm.
I know that with thyroid, it releases certain hormones, and so if that's imbalanced, that's also something that can affect a person's mood and all that. So I was wondering if you can share a little bit on that. And then the last question I wanted to know, as far as mental illness. I'm sorry, I'm gonna try to squeeze this one in too. But as far as mental illness, like a lot of times, like we know people who may have issues with that, but for those that may get a little bit out of hand, where you can't control them, like what advice would you give? Because for some people, as we've heard recently in the news, the mom had to call the police and it didn't end well. So what advice would you give to that as well?
Okay, so regarding the thyroid, again, I am not a doctor, but there have been studies recently about the thyroid where people's thyroid is either overly active or underly active. And of course, we do know that that affects, so people who begin to gain weight because their thyroid is not working properly, that kind of results in depression. I know someone personally, she is struggling with that. She's gained literally 40 pounds because she's having to take medication because of her thyroid. And so now she's depressed. And when people see that they're having excessive weight gain, or excessive weight loss, or you know when your body isn't functioning properly, it is highly recommended that you go get that checked out. We have to do better with trying to always self-assess ourselves as people, especially African American people. We have a tendency to think and undervalue our health by thinking that we can look it up on a Google spreadsheet or looking up on Google, self assess ourselves, and then do the diagnosis and the cure and all of those things. And sometimes some things just require you to go in. If you know that you are having, lumps in your neck, right? Or lumps in certain places and it's not normal, go and get that checked out. Don't wait until the last minute. And then also remembering that depression, stress, and anxiety, that comes from stress stays in the body, right? And as we have stress in our body, this is really where cancers develop. Cancers are just like little mini negative thing ions in the body saying, no, 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 yeah. So all the negativity, they start getting all their friends together. Then all the good friends, what they do is they take the good friends over. And so the cancer begins to erode the more negativity that you have in your body. So when your body isn't alkaline, well, cancer can survive, right? So just thinking about those things. I don't want to go into a whole nother rant and rave, but I know Lisa's like, girl, stop. Okay, anyway. So with that, the thyroid, if you see that you are, there are symptoms of that, you need to kind of go to the doctor for that. The second part of that is, what was the second part of that?
Okay, so I think maybe the second part would need to be in the second episode.
Okay.
Because I think, Naima, you did. What we'll do is, Neff, we'll at the end, our wonderful producer, Naima Abdullah Wells, is going to put up some important phone numbers and websites that we can reference as resources for if any of our family members are dealing, with this. It's very important that we be supportive and
Right,
get them the resources, because sometimes your brain is just so jumbled that you can't seek it out yourself. So
right,
at least providing that information to them and trying to help them, get that as much as you can is the best thing we can do.
right.
So thank you, Crown Nation, for joining us on this wonderful episode. Please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. And please keep the comments coming, keep the love coming. We appreciate it. We're really enjoying, sharing ourselves with you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Rock the crown.
see you all next
See you next
time.
time.
We love you. Be safe.
Peace.